going to be mounting an attack because while it is in the House Rules Committee, Madigan could send that to a committee in the House, perhaps the House Executive Committee, for hearing. It could happen at any time. Anytime. We have to do the best we can to kill the bill in the committee's system of the House and the Senate. And so the very first issue will, in my opinion, come sometime, maybe relatively soon. Let me talk about the dates, but the process, let me go through the process quickly. It goes to a committee in the House. The committee will hold a hearing and take a vote. The vote to get a bill out of a legislative committee, it has to receive the majority vote of the total membership of the committee. So if there's 17 members of the committee, you have to have 10 yes votes to get a bill out. So, but suppose that it does come out of the committee. Then it goes on to the floor, basically, of the House. A vote is then taken by the members of the House, and if it gets a 3/5 vote, it goes to the Senate for the same kind of treatment. If it goes through the whole House and Senate passing, and then you got to keep, I'm going to give you a date, you got to keep this date, very important, it's the 9th of May. This has to all take place before the 9th of May, because the Constitution very wisely says if somebody's going to vote on a constitutional amendment, they have 6 months opening for that to take place. So should that happen, we will be ready and able to do a statewide effort. And you will all be involved in that because that will be on the ballot. And if the issue gets a majority of the total votes cast, it becomes a part of the Constitution for a long period of time. Or if it gets 60% of those voting on the issue, you add the yeses to the noes, and if the yeses get 60% of that, it becomes a part of the Constitution. We're ready for all of these contingencies. And we will be here. We're watching very carefully the first effort by Madigan. And I've known, well, I'm going to go back a little bit. Madigan, where did Dick Lockhart first meet Michael Madigan? It was before he became a member of the House of Representatives, because he ran as one of the delegates to the 1970 Constitutional Convention and was elected. That was his first elective office. And that is where in 1960, that election for delegates took place in 1969. And I had the occasion to meet now Speaker Madigan, but at that time, Michael Madigan from the southwest side of Chicago, candidate for delegate to the Constitutional Convention. His pal who went along with him in the election was none other than Richard M. Daley, son of the original Mayor Daley. So these two powerful political people got their beginning as a delegate to the Constitutional Convention in 1970. Small world sometimes in the world that we live in. What I'm trying to say is this is a very serious issue. I am not by nature complacent. I, like I say, operate on the basis, expect the worst and plan accordingly. Part of that goes back to a reference that Linda made to the Battle of the Bulge. We were told the Germans were about ready to surrender in December of '44. They did exactly the opposite. They attacked in December of '44 after we were left almost defenseless. Anyway, so that has cured my attitude about complacency. And I want all of you not to be complacent. This can magic, this can emerge. I'm going to remind the audience, Linda, experience we had about 5 years ago. A constitutional amendment was introduced in the House of Representatives. It amended the same section of the Constitution. I think it's Section 13, Article 5. That was introduced in the House. Did not take out the diminution, the other questions about diminution or entail, but it had funny language in it, and I couldn't quite figure out what the authors of it were driving at. The authors were some law firm here in Chicago. A number of people thought it was a harmless constitutional amendment. But I was always uncomfortable about it, so I tracked down the woman who was during the Constitutional Convention, had a high exposure to lots of the provisions that were in the Constitution. Her name is Anne Luzine. She is currently, and was at that time, after the adjournment of the Constitution, she became a professor at the John Marshall Law School. So I went over to the John Marshall Law School and asked Anne Luzine, who's a good friend, and I asked her to take a look at this piece of legislation that was just introduced and tell me, what did she see some dangers, some things that a lot of other people could not see. She gave us a written opinion. It's very dangerous, she said, the way it's been written, and should be opposed. So we immediately, and Linda was leading back in generating a large amount of effort to defeat this constitutional amendment, which we now went through all the cycle that I outlined and was on the ballot that November. And here's Anne Luzine said that's a very dangerous piece of legislation that's on the ballot. Guess who the sponsor was of that particular constitutional amendment? Michael Madigan. Okay? The election was held, and do we have anybody here for the retired teachers of Chicago here? Well, I had a good relationship with the executive director, and between her efforts and Linda's efforts, we mounted a campaign at the last few minutes. We worked morning, noon, and night. The vote was cast on that election. The vote got more yes votes than no votes, but it did not quite get the 60% that is needed to pass. It got more yes votes than no votes, but it had to get a higher number of yes votes for it to become effective. That's our memory about this piece, about constitutional amendments, and it's a lesson we will never forget. I do not, as I said earlier, take any chances. I operate on the basis, expect the worst and plan accordingly, and I ask my clients to do the same. It's an interesting world, but we prevailed because of members like you, other members across the state who we were able, in the short time that we had, to convince them this was not a good idea, folks. Vote no. Enough of them did so that that proposed constitutional amendment, sponsored by Michael Madigan, did not prevail. There was a strong lesson that I'm trying to convey to you in this little bit of Illinois history. And so we are doubly alert to anything that emerges. That's why I'm 94 years old. I spent a good share of those years in Springfield, Illinois, in the one building called the Capitol Building. Although I'm retired, it's quite possible I may get pressed into service again, some way or other, but we hope this does not get on the it has a lot of obstacles in front of it. And the date, I don't remember I left the date with you or not, I think the 9th of May. They have to get it out of the legislature by the 9th of May, because at that point, who knows, at that point, if it's still not taken out by that time, it will be on the ballot. It will be on the ballot. That's the deadline for getting on thing. So the legislature has to do their part. If they get that done by the 9th of May, this constitutional amendment will be on the ballot. Be prepared. Anyway, one thing I should have announced at the very beginning, I'm hard of hearing. I'm hearing aids, but if you have questions or comments, someone may have to relay them to me, but I'll do my best to answer all your questions, because you are the most valuable asset we have in trying to deal with these serious constitutional questions that come up from time to time. And all we need is advance time. The will of you on your part will be good. We just want to be able to get and provide enough time, enough information, so that you can be an effective adversary for whoever comes up with something like a constitutional amendment, especially this one, this year, is the worst one we've ever seen. Worst one we've ever seen. I want to add a footnote here to it. The State University of New Orleans Association wants to be a player, and they should be a player. They have come up with an alternative way of saying we want to help solve this problem too. So they've come up with a piece of legislation, and I think Linda may refer to that, but this is an organization that they don't go around saying, no, we don't want anything. They're prepared to provide support. So and that piece of legislation has been introduced in the House, and we hope we can bring it to a successful vote in the legislature. But those are my comments today. Again, I thank you for inviting me here once more to share this situation as best I can. And I'll do my best to answer any questions. A question there. Say it so Linda can hear it and I can hear it.
I actually have a question for both of you. I guess for people who are already retired, what's the skin in the game? In other words, is there any legal protection for those who retired under the old Constitution, or are our base pensions at issue in addition to the 3% annual increases? In other words, what do our lawyers say? What's the legal opinion if this were to pass?
Well, First of all, I'm not exactly sure what the constitutional amendment would end up saying, but second, and most importantly, we already fought Senate Bill 1, which was to keep your benefits as they are. So I would say that for Tier 1, that there would be no change.
Legally, in other words.
Legally, there would be no change. That doesn't mean you wouldn't have to fight, because so many things end up having to go to court, regardless of whether you're wrong or you're right.
So if this were to pass and the legislators try to cut our base pensions, then SUAA and other unions
Absolutely.
would take this to court, and our legal counsel believes that the Supreme Court might rule that our base pensions.
I would think that the Supreme Court would say we'd already been here.
I just want to point out is that for those of us who are retired, we may feel fairly comfortable, but SUA as an organization, SUAA as an organization, is not only about those of us old-timers who are retired. It is looking out for those people coming into the system who we do not want to have their benefits diminished or impaired before they even get here. So while we tend to think of our organization as a bunch of old retirees, anybody who's in the system, anybody who's hired in is an annuitant. And that's the thing to remember, that we are really fighting for the young folks. We're okay, or relatively okay.
I wouldn't ever say that we're okay. And one of the reasons is because the changes that could come to pension systems. And there's talk out there, once again, of trying to consolidate the pension systems, kind of talk behind closed doors. But I can remember 10 years ago, 11 years ago, when they tried to do the same thing. And I was